Heyo, what is up everyone? It is the ALPHAJ of the ALPHAJ show, and thank all of you who voted in the Twitter poll quite some time ago for picking whatever show you wanted it to be. The majority have spoken, and as this title would suggest, it is Courage the Cowardly Dog. Now I have a very interesting history with this show and the episode that I picked, as well as my reasonings. It isn't going to be a light episode today, opposed to the other 3 episodes I've talked about earlier. So to help me with this episode, I decided to call the help of Gem Reviews. Gem Reviews. Gem.
Thank you! Hello, everyone!
Was that really necessary?
Well, what can I say? Sometimes you just gotta make a grand entrance. But really, thanks for having me, ALPHAJ. I'm really looking forward to joining you with this, as the episode we're talking about today, Remembrance of Courage Past, is a front runner for my favorite episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog. Every now and then, a show likes to go the extra mile with certain episodes that are special to them, and you can tell that's what the staff did for this particular episode, and for good reason. It was their second to last episode, and its sister episode is the series finale. And I would say they gave this show a send-off for, you know, a horror comedy about a dog that deals with creepy characters on a daily basis.
So before we get on to this review, I just want to set the scene on exactly where I stand with Courage. In a stream, I remember someone asking a question, pretty much what cartoon did I not like growing up that I do like now, and the answer is, you guessed it, Courage. I noticed within the community, fans and reviewers alike, that the general consensus on cartoons we quote-unquote watched growing up seems to be very similar. Avatar, Samurai Jack, SpongeBob, Courage, Ed, Edd n Eddy, and the lot. However, for me, there are certain shows I did not grow up watching, like Avatar, like Courage, but for different reasons. As a kid, I generally preferred comedy shows opposed to story-heavy shows like Avatar. However, Courage is a different beast altogether. I was not a horror guy growing up, not one bit. However, getting into my teenage years, then I was. And anything from film scores to novels to even TV shows, if it was horror, I would give it a shot. And that meant Courage. So going back to watch it, I actually ended up liking it. And to this day, I remember the one episode that really hooked me into the show. Remembrance of Courage's Past. Now, this episode is the last episode pair of the series, so to those who have wanted me to do a Did It End Well, you can consider this that. So the episode starts off with Muriel cooking chicken dumplings, Courage's favorite, and the music as well as the sizzling of the food and a tranquil atmosphere set the tone of making this feel like a lovely home. Courage's face shows it all, and I really enjoy this opener. I love how we get to see Courage so calm before this episode dives into very deep territory.
But then Courage notices on his milk carton a bunch of missing dogs, and a sea of memories comes rushing back to him about his parents, making this the only episode where we see Courage's parents and his childhood. This puts him in a state of paralysis where he's lost in thoughts, and he's so deep into it he doesn't even notice Eustace using his trademark Ooga Booga Booga. I think that's the only time Courage didn't react to something like this too. And that actually says a lot about how hard these memories hit Courage. Like, the sheer fact he wouldn't react to this is more than enough of an indication that these memories must have really traumatized him. And we get to see exactly what that is as the episode dives deeper into Courage's memories.
You can really feel the emotion from this. Huh? The music in Courage the Cowardly Dog has always been up there when it comes to cartoon music. The really interesting part about this episode specifically is the flashbacks. I love the white border they use around as well as the instruments they choose, which if Rugrats has taught me anything, give a very youthful feel to this. I like how at first he's confused on why he gets hit by the ball, but then enjoys it. It's a touching scene which takes a dramatic turn when baby Courage gets stuck within a gate. Confused, scared, and upset, he's taken to the vet where he eventually eventually gets taken out. We then meet this guy. This guy here is a sicko. His design even evokes the emotion of unease, which is perfect. Not only for this episode, but for this show. There are a lot of monsters and villains in Courage, but I'd argue this quote monster should be up there as one of the worst, and you'll see why. Wanting to talk to Courage's parents in private, we get this scene here. I've heard of the cat getting your tongue, but this is ridiculous. So ending the first half of this flashback, Courage, baby Courage mind you, sees his parents getting abducted and taken by this crazed vet. You have to imagine, from a skittish and innocent being that is Courage, how that must feel. Sure, he cries a lot, but there's sadness and then there's dread. Having your parents taken away from you, that's dread.
And trust me, we're gonna have a lot to say about this monster and how his actions really affected Courage. Fearing Courage might be feeling ill, Muriel tells Eustace they should take him to the vet, which Courage is understandably afraid of doing. And as luck would have it, the exact same veterinarian is working there. So Courage takes off running, which triggers more of his childhood flashbacks and reveals what actually happened to Courage's parents. And despite Courage's best efforts to save them, Courage is forced to flee and watch in complete, heartbreaking fashion his parents being shot out into space. God, if that doesn't break your heart. And this is interesting in a lot of ways, but I think the biggest reason is, well, do you guys know that conspiracy theory about Courage? That the people Courage sees aren't actually monsters, he just views them that way?
Funny you mention that, because that clip was one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this specific episode first. So when Courage's parents get sent up into space, that is the last time Courage sees them. We have no indication in the episode that he doesn't hate his parents, and I'm sure he really loves them. We also have no true way of knowing if this is one of Courage's first contact with humans, but when you think of Courage, you think of this easily skittish dog. But you have to remember that Courage is that way for a reason. It's like an abused cat, or really any pet. It's not so much that they're a coward, but more of they don't want conflict. They don't want to deal with the trauma again. They don't understand that different people act different ways to the level that us humans do. And Courage is no different. Anytime Muriel or even Eustace is in trouble, of course he's going to be scared. So the theory that from his viewpoint, the monsters are just common people, and nowhere looks the way that it does, simply because he doesn't have that much information on the outside world, maybe they are viewpoints that refute it. But since Courage has been personified to be a character like a child, you can't deny that he's grown up in a world that is tough and cold and has a lot of people who are out for themselves, like the vet. So you can't expect Courage to not be scared when someone that he cares about is being taken away from him, because someone may not come around the same way Muriel did for him, and that's probably one of the biggest takeaways from this episode. Plus, the vet is one of the very few villains to actually get away with what he did. Well, initially, of course.
And aside from this veterinarian, Muriel and Eustace are one of the only characters to be portrayed as actual humans. I mean, yeah, they've had characters like Freaky Fred or Dr. Zolas to appear human, but they're still designed to look like dangerous individuals. And some of the other humans in this universe, like Dr. Vindaloo or Eustace's mom, for example, aren't ever portrayed as a danger to Courage himself. And that's possibly because he trusts them too. So maybe Courage's views of these people are much deeper than they look like villains. Maybe Courage views them this way because Courage senses that they're evil since he was exposed to it at such a young age. And the veterinarian is really the only character to be a monster that isn't designed as an actual monster. And the fact that Courage comes across the human that ruined his life and the human that saved his life all on the same day, I think that gives you a really deep insight into Courage's psyche and why he views so many people as monsters other than people who mostly don't seem to pose any kind of a threat. Aside from Eustace, but heck, even though Eustace is a monster in his own way, Courage still knows Eustace means the world to Muriel, hence why he's so willing to save Eustace despite his treatment of Courage and doesn't view Eustace as an actual monster.
The vet wanting to see Courage alone is already a red flag. Courage, knowing this, runs through the lab, which looks a lot creepier than before, while the flashback is still going on. The structure of the flashback being played in segments throughout the episode is also a nice touch, because you kind of want to see how both the flashback and the actual story end. Also, the comedy in this episode is few and far in between, but it is there. It's mainly used to break up what is essentially a very emotionally investing story. During the flashback, we also get Courage using the magic tongue that was originally ripped off onto the lollipop to get into the room with the rocket. Baby Courage, mind you. And I don't want to downplay this either, because his height and his wit was not where it is now. Seeing as before, upon approaching this door is when he got caught. In fact, once approaching his parents, he simply bangs on the door trying to pry it open, and now jumping out once Eustace and Muriel are being put in. Being one of the first humans to know about his sick project, he reveals to them and the audience that he plans to breed Earth dogs into space dogs, and there's not much beyond that. But I really do appreciate the little things put into this episode, like Baby Courage being frozen as the vet rushes up to him, as a little kid would be, or the fact that the door leading into the room is a big scene for him. I know when I remember the things that were a big impact in my life, it's not the overarching thing that I remember the most, but often the things that are very unimportant that happened throughout the day, like what you were doing before it happened or what room you were in when it happened. Maybe the door is that way as it would be for someone who's had a traumatic memory. But this is the climax, as we get to see how Courage fails in rescuing his parents, but also tries to not replicate that failure with Eustace and Muriel.
And that's Courage's biggest obstacle. While he saved his owners in other episodes, this is Courage confronting something that traumatized him at a young age. He's facing the very center of all of his fears. And that's probably the biggest act of courage anyone can do. Confronting your past is probably one of the scariest and hardest things you'll ever do in your life. But just like all these other episodes, the motivation Courage needs comes from his owners. And I think this shows how strong of a bond Courage really has with them. And I think that point is made even clearer when Courage's last flashback is of him being found by Muriel right after he lost his parents.
My poor thing. Out here all alone? What courage you have. Would you like to come home with me? I'll call you Courage. We'll have a grand time.
In a way, this act of caring and kindness gave Courage, well, for lack of a better word, his true inner courage.
That part always gets to me because he's watching as his parents get shot out into space, essentially powerless. He's sitting in trash with nowhere to go, and no one that he can really trust to turn to. The music at this part couldn't get better. I think it's really flawless. The way it resolves alongside the flashback ending. We see that Courage feels a lot safer than he initially was, and to a slight extent Eustace as well. It's that loyalty that really binds this episode together. The episode ends with a scene in space, where all of the dogs he split with their owners or parents finally get back at him, using the net as a symbolic form of revenge. I honestly don't know what his plan was. Was he depending on the dogs that got shot into space essentially make their way back? Was he going to visit them? How did he expect them to get muscular and breed? Well, none of that really matters now, because as far as I'm concerned, that vet is most likely gone, and quite frankly, I'm much happier thinking of him in that way.
Think about it like this, too. This episode essentially ends with Courage losing all reason he had of being so cowardly in the first place. Everything Courage experienced all throughout this episode, in fact, the very event that the show hints at in its intro,
abandoned as a pup, he was found by Muriel, who lives in the middle of nowhere.
All of that is gone now. Courage faced it and conquered it, which should, for the most part, prevent any more of Courage's irrational fears. It's basically the exact ending this show needed, because Courage, after all of this, is no longer a cowardly dog.
Overall, when you look at this episode and its sister episode Perfect, I think this is a better finale for Courage. Seeing as Courage finally has some form of closure to one of his first traumatic moments in his life, and to see that his parents are okay, it kind of gives closure to the audience, and a little bit to him that he's going to be okay. There are bad people out there, but there's also good people, and he's very lucky to have good people in his life. It is also a great message to anyone out there who may have had or have a general distrust for people after similar experiences. Not everyone is malicious, but it may take years, decades, even over the course of a lifetime before some people are able to trust again. Taking a very skittish dog who's essentially gone through a lot, if he can finally relax a little and feel like the one true monster that got away is gone, I feel as though that's an amazing way to end what is a great series. The story was moving, and like I said a few times, the music throughout fits like a glove perfectly. I like the way they structured the flashback in segments, and again I like the aesthetic of the white border surrounding the flashback. Eustace, while grumpy, doesn't hurt the episode in any way. Also, the monster, villain, vet, whatever you want to call him, was very compelling. I'm not one of those people who thinks every cartoon has to have episodes like this, because many aren't built to be that way, but if you're going to go this route, you better go big, and you'll end up with an episode that many of us still remember today. What do you think, Jem?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Every good show has its strengths, but the best shows know how to use their strengths in the best ways possible. Courage the Cowardly Dog has always been one of those shows. It always seemed to know which episode needed to be story-driven, which needed deep messages, or which episode just needed to be a good horror comedy episode. And, like any good show does, they saved all their best ideas for the final episode. And in the end, it's one of the best things this show has ever created.
Make sure to check out Jem Review's channel. He covers a lot of shows around this time, like Ed, Edd n Eddy and Hey Arnold, shows that I did watch a bit growing up. He also covers Courage a lot more, and I'll put a link to the first part of his journey into Courage in the description below. Besides that, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Follow me at The Alpha J Show on Twitter, and feel free to leave a request in the request video for any topic you think I should cover. If you really like this video, I highly suggest you check out Jem Review's channel. Make sure to subscribe and feel free to consider my Patreon as always. I hope your time is well spent, and Alpha out.